Almost 13 years after the release of Half-Life Episode 2, we finally get to return to City 17, and the question on everybody's lips is, was it worth the wait? Did the developers at Valve somehow rise to the occasion, or was the weight of expectation simply too much for Alyx to bear? It's not a question that is answered early. Half-Life Alyx is a different experience at the beginning than it is at the end. The first half spends a lot of time teaching you its menagerie of virtual reality mechanics, some bespoke and some borrowed. But it's the second half of the game where Half-Life Alyx truly begins to sing, by doing what the series has historically done best, combining physics, fireplay, and memorable set pieces. So while early parts of the game may have felt like a Half-Life flavoured virtual reality shooter, albeit a good one, by the time the credits had rolled, I had my answer. Half-Life Alyx is not only the best virtual reality game I've ever played, it's an essential Half-Life experience, a deftly executed celebration of Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 that ultimately plants the seed for the return of the franchise. You see, from a narrative perspective, this is no mere side story, it truly is the next chapter in the series, and it also manages to capture the elements of gameplay that make Half-Life Half-Life. Fun multi-directional battles, smart physics puzzles, novel environments, fun characters, and interesting enemies. The only disappointment here is that it being a game designed around virtual reality, far fewer people are going to get to experience it. So for those of you who are lucky enough to have a VR system, those of you on the fence, and those of you who just need to know, let me tell you why Half-Life Alyx is a worthy entry in my favourite game series of all time. And don't worry, we'll keep story spoilers out of it. First things first, Half-Life Alyx is not a short game. My final playthrough was somewhere between 11 and 12 hours, making it closer to the length of Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2 than either of the episodes. In terms of structure, this plays like a Half-Life game. The experience is one singular linear event that takes place across several locations in City 17. Each chapter is in a new location, there's a day-to-night cycle, and you cover a lot of ground. The game takes place in the titular City 17, 5 years before the return of Gordon Freeman at the start of Half-Life 2. You play as his AI companion from the previous games, Alyx Vance, who runs recon missions for a fledgling resistance against the Combine invasion. Early hours of the game involve a lot of getting familiar with the controls. Weapons are chosen via a holographic menu triggered by your dominant hand, and each of the game's handful of weapons needs to be loaded in a very specific way. Alyx also has access to the multi-tools she used in the earlier games, which can be used to trace electrical wires and hack Combine machinery via a multitude of spatial minigames. These, for the most part, are actually a lot of fun, and while they can sometimes edge towards feeling tiresome during long play sessions, the multi-tool is a fun piece of kit to wield, and these puzzles are some of the game's smartest moments. But the biggest trick in Alyx's sleeve are the gravity gloves. Unlocked early in the game, these give you the ability to pull objects towards you, be it ammunition, resin used for upgrading your weapons, or random objects you want to use to your advantage. Half-Life Alyx is a very tactile experience. Whether you're opening doors, rummaging through shelves, or pulling apart wooden barricades, you're constantly sticking your hands in places. I played the game with my Vive Index, and the finger tracking and haptic feedback made these moments feel relatively natural. It's also a much more intimate view of City 17 than we've ever had before. I had a lot of fun just exploring these spaces and trying to feel what life would have been like here, even if contact with other people in this game is few and far between. This isn't a revolution for virtual reality, but it is an achievement. Similar to how World of Warcraft didn't really reinvent the MMO so much as it took industry-wide learnings and executed it better than anyone had ever done before, Half-Life Alyx is by far the best execution of long-form single-player experience I've ever seen. From the interface design to shooting and exploration, as long as you're fine with the general quibbles of VR, Half-Life Alyx does a really great job of minimizing the jank that we often associate with these types of games. It's also worth mentioning that I played the game in 2 room-scale setups, first at the NoClip studio where I had a ridiculous 20 by 20 foot space to play in, and then at home where it was around half of that, let's say 9 by 10 foot, better mirroring the average VR play space at a home. And while I enjoyed the extra space at the studio, both worked completely fine, though at home I did punch the wall a few times in the heat of battle. and battle things you will, whether it's returning favourites or some new additions. There's no shortage of enemies to fire bullets at during your time in City 17. Set-piece firefights can be intense, and while the AI has been kind of dumbed down to account for virtual reality, I still found the experience of trying to figure out how to best these enemies lots of fun. Each enemy has a weak point that can be shot at to take them out quickly, but the game also rewards lateral thinking, and you'll often find novel ways to clean out enemies, while helping to save a few more of your precious bullets. The game offers you multiple movement options, but the default blink was by far and away the best for me. While it can be spammed to effectively teleport yourself away from enemies during firefights, the freedom of movement it gives you feels best in combat. While indoors, it was often fun just to stretch the limits of my room scale by walking between rooms. Oftentimes, Half-Life Alyx is beautifully immersive, and it's just nice to be there. Level design is outstanding throughout, both in terms of visual variety and the layout of puzzles and combat encounters, especially in the game's second half, in which each chapter seems to be trying as hard as it can to best the previous one. One notable mention is a chapter simply called Jeff, which is one of the best levels I've ever played in a shooter and is sure to be an instant classic. While die-hard fans of the series will really enjoy some terrific nods to Half-Life levels of old. We also have a new character in Russell, performed by Kiwi comedian Rhys Darby. The banter between him and the freshly voiced Alyx is as sharp as Valve has ever been.
Hey, Russell, I just found a loose syringe of God knows what. Is this medicine?
Does it have a skull and crossbones on it?
I don't see one.
Probably medicine then.
And for fans of Half-Life's story, there's a lot to enjoy here. While early chapters may feel more like a VR game set in the Half-Life world, the closer you get to the game's finale, the more you realise that you are really inside the latest chapter of Half-Life. Half-Life Alyx is no more a side chapter than the episodes were. This isn't a reboot or a refresh. It's not some boring prequel that stands in the shadow of its older siblings. Half-Life Alyx is the passing of a baton, 13 years in the making. I'm doing a lot of talking around what happens in this game, and truly it's because I think people should experience it. Half-Life games have always had interesting endings, but the fact that they somehow managed to stick the landing on Half-Life Alyx is perhaps its greatest achievement. Whether or not the future of the franchise is in virtual reality or on a flatter screen, we don't know. I imagine Valve don't really know until they see the reaction to this game, whether or not it sells and whether or not fans are happy. But whatever the case, for the first time in forever, it feels like the franchise truly does have a future. If nothing else, that's a reason to celebrate Half-Life Alyx. The return of an old friend that didn't forget where it came from, but also brought along some new tricks. Welcome back, Half-Life. We missed you.